to the rest of the world, to the port of Mocha.
Maybe talk about that. What is a cafe mentality?
A cafe mentality.
It's like an Anthony Bourdain slash censorship regime.
We have that. We all have that cafe culture.
Well, but you have the European cafe culture, and it came to Palestine. Colonialism
Really?
is bad, but sometimes colonizers bring some good things.
Yeah.
So, and then today, like in Jordan and in Palestine, you've got the coffee shops that are like more like European ones that have espressos and cappuccino. You can't get an Arabic coffee in a lot of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But then you have Arabic coffee as well. So these two, they converged a little bit, and you still have like male-only Arabic or tea houses.
Right. There was that.
Where they play tawle and they
The shisha
tea
bar.
or coffee and shisha. But then you have others that are full of girls smoking shisha and smoking coffee.
But I mean, in terms of indigenous, the tea would be definitely.
Tea and Arabic coffee.
You drink it also in small as an espresso.
Yeah, Arabic coffee.
But you
it's
say
not espresso, it's Arabic coffee.
Right, okay, with the marca down here, like a Greek or exactly. So I thought the Turks is more Turks than Greek.
No, Arabic coffee
It's
is
also
Arabic coffee.
okay. No, I like it. We drink it also in France, in Romania. We have
And they also have the white Arabic coffee.
Yeah, this
is different from the Turkish.
I'll take a try. In the part where I was Syria and Iraq, it was tea. Just tea. They would give you an espresso because the one instant coffee because they thought I needed my coffee. Yes, I was like, I want to drink your tea.
Nescafe.
Nescafe
with sugar.
Like please, exactly.
You give me this.
But the tea, I think the tea is Iranian. The black tea they have there, and the cigarettes are like fake Marlboros.
Iranian tea and Turkish tea are very good.
Yeah,
they're very strong.
Okay, we're rolling.
Okay, we were talking anyway. I think we're already talking. So this
it's a good intro.
Yeah, the indigenous drinks after meal.
Coffee and tea.
Coffee and tea with the tea. And the Turkish, in Turkey we would call it coffee Turkish. In Greece, of course, you cannot. On Armenian street in Beirut, don't call it a Turkish coffee. No, it was good, but I had.
No, but in Palestine, it's Arabic coffee.
Right, it's Arabic coffee.
Arabic, yeah.
Exactly. And I think in the Armenian street, I didn't call it Armenian coffee because it doesn't really exist Arabic coffee. I was just careful not to say Turkish coffee because in France we call it Turkish coffee.
No, of course. Yeah.
And so you gotta be careful where you are. So maybe you want to tell us a little bit about what took you here and your background and what makes you interested and able to talk like no one else about what's going on in Palestine. And what stands in the way of you talking, the censorship, how it's been to convey that message to the world, and what are you facing in terms of people and institutions?
Nobody stands in my way, but I've always been an independent agent, so nobody can fire me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not part of anything, but the story, the story of my journey is that I went from the sphere of the colonizer and broke away and took a journey into the sphere of the other.
And just to be clear, the colonizer would be Israel.
Me, of course.
As part of the Israel.
Yeah.
Israel.
I was born Israeli. I was born into an Israeli. It's very, very Zionist.
So you call them
colonizer?
Okay.
I don't think anybody has any doubt that Israel is a colonizer. Israelis are colonizers. Yeah.
Good to define the terms.
Colonizer and Israel created. Zionism created colonies, but it's not just colonies in terms of villages or towns. An entire existence that doesn't even realize that there's another existence there. So when you grow up in Israel, you think you're in Israel. You don't realize that you're in Palestine, unless you do what I did, which is take this journey, which I call in my book. I call it the journey of an Israeli in Palestine.
What does it take to take this journey?
When I was growing up, and again, I was not only subjected to the regular Zionist education, but my family was a founding fathers family. Not just my father, the general, but I had a grandfather who signed the Declaration of Independence and a great uncle who was a president. So, everybody all the time was talking about the state and the Jews and the state of the Jews. And this was like everywhere, everything, all the time. How we contribute to the state and how we contribute this way and that way. There was never a conversation about the fact that there were other people there. From time to time, somebody would say something about the Arabs, but it was in passing. Eventually, fast forwarding, I took that step which again I call a journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and to paraphrase Fanon, out of the sphere of the colonizer, where the roads are paved and the lights are on and the water's you have all the water you need, and you live in a modern liberal kind of society, into this other sphere of the colonized. Now, when I was growing up, there were no checkpoints, there was no wall, there was nothing you could cross, but you never ever would do it because you had all the checkpoints and walls in your head. You didn't need the physical wall. You would never, I grew up in Jerusalem, you'd never go to a Palestinian neighborhood.
It
ever.
just would not come up to mind, or it felt like it was unsafe, or
No, first of all, it wouldn't come to mind because why would you go? But it was also unsafe. I remember this. I was, when you're right, you remember things. So I was writing the book. I remember if we ever took a family trip that required going through Palestinian towns. My father, who by then he was a retired general, he had the AK-47 in the car, in the back of the car. And the message that that gives you is that they're dangerous, and of course Arabs are dangerous, and Arabs are unclean, and Arabs are liars, and Arabs are undependable, and they could kill you, and they want to kill us all. So this is going on in the back of your mind. Eventually, when I did take that step, it all came forward right away. It all woke up. All these crazy little demons woke up and went right to the front. And I'm driving into a city like Nazareth, which is it's a city, it's a Palestinian city, but I mean, it could be more benign. Or later on, driving even in the West Bank, these beautiful villages, and all I could see was these Arabs wanting to kill me. And I had to fight, really, really struggled by myself to develop the trust that could allow me to keep going,
conditioning that
as opposed to turning a run around.
So that's interesting. Even going back to these experiences with your dad, having to, quote unquote, to go through Palestinian territory with the AK-47 in the back, was it a perceived threat? In fact, you might not even need the AK-47, or there was an element of actually real threat?
Look, he didn't hold it. It was in the trunk.
Right.
So it was just in case, you know what I mean? But the message is, especially when you're a child, I mean, it's obvious. But even besides that, I mean, it was always understood that, you don't go into an Arab neighborhood. We wouldn't even go. So it was a thing to do on Saturday, sometimes to go to the old city of Jerusalem, which is very nice, and you have shops, but you stick to the Jewish side, and you don't go to other areas you don't go to places where Palestinians shop. You go to the tourist areas, or you go to the where the Jews are more. I mean, that kind of thing, because it's very dangerous. You don't know.
You don't even want to know if it's actually very dangerous.
You don't want to find out.
Yeah.
Now you have walls, you have checkpoints, you have soldiers, thousands of. I mean, the country is 1,000 times more militarized. With actual people standing on the ground.
What happened that now the other checkpoints you didn't have it before is more radical.
Well, I mean,
resistance.
Several things happened. First of all, the Palestinian resistance became more pronounced. There are a lot more settlers now, and the settlers are,
extremely.
They are. First of all, the settlers are a new brand. Not really a new brand, but they're kind of a new brand of Israeliness. A little more fanatic, and they put kind of a religious tone to Zionism, which didn't exist before. I don't think they're any more radical than my parents' generation were, the first generation of Israelis, if you will. But their presence let me put it this way. In 1948, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, about 1 million Palestinians were thrown out, and Israelis built went into the empty cities, and then they built towns and so on around them. But they went into empty places. There were no centers of Palestinian existence, population that they went into. The West Bank was different. When they took the West Bank, they went into population centers. People were still there. Granted, many were kicked out, but the vast majority of the population of the West Bank was there. So the settlers were now among the population. So this creates a whole different kind of provocation.
When you say they took the West Bank, one might think, well, the West Bank as part of the peace process was Palestinian, but it seems that they actually did not apply any of the commitment that they made. What does it mean they took the West Bank?
So Palestine was occupied in two steps. The first step in 1948, when Israel was established, the vast majority, almost 80% of Palestine was taken. There were two parts of Palestine that the Zionist leadership decided not to take at that moment. these became known as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So when the borders were drawn, when Israel drew the borders, because the borders were drawn based on Israeli dictates, they drew this one area that became known as the West Bank, and then they drew this other area which became known as the Gaza Strip. This was dictated by the Israelis, and then they were, of course, ratified with the ceasefire agreements or with the different countries
So
around
you would
them.
think that they would not.
Then, but the intent was always to take these spaces. Always,
They were buying time essentially.
they just wanted to
giving the impression that they were
was not the right
compliant.
time. That was not the right time. They were waiting for the right
But
time.
that's not what they
I
were
have a-
saying to the international community. They were claiming that they were.
No, they didn't say anything to
didn't
the
care.
international community. But actually, I'll give you an example of what they were saying. I have a quote in my book in the General Sun. I read the biography of one of Israel's early prime ministers, Moshe Sharet, and he describes 1955 or something before, and all these Jewish American dignitaries came to visit, and they were given a talk, and the prime minister was there and everybody, and they were given a talk by a young Israeli officer who was my father. And in his talk, this young, well-spoken officer said that the army is ready and waiting for the command to push Israel's eastern boundaries to its natural place, which is the Jordan River. In other words, to take the West Bank. So there was no question that they were going to take the West Bank. It's just the army was waiting for the command, and the government just wanted to wait for the right time. The right time came in June, June of 1967 was the right time for some reason. But the point is that this was always in the plan. So then when I say they took the West Bank, they took the West Bank and they added it to the rest of the state of Israel, and that's it. But what they did was, in terms of the bureaucracy that governs the West Bank, it's different than the bureaucracy that governs other parts of the country in terms of the laws that the Arabs live under, the Palestinians live under. So the way the apartheid state was designed, the Palestinians live under different types of laws, not just from the Jews, but also from each other, depending on where they are geographically. So if you're an Israeli Jew, if you live in the West Bank, if you live in the Galilee, if you live in Jerusalem, it doesn't matter. You're a citizen. If you're a Palestinian, if you live in the West Bank, that's one set of rules, one set of laws. You're under military law. If you live in Jerusalem, you're under a different set of laws. If you live in the south in the Naqab as a Palestinian citizen of Israel, it's a different set of laws. And if you live in the northern part of the country as a citizen of Israel, it's another set of laws. It's a different bureaucracy that governs your life.
So where is the authority of what we think about the Palestinian
The
authority?
Palestinian authority is nothing. They don't have the authority they have less authority than a city council. They have nothing.
You said military law in the West Bank, so effectively there is the ultimate decision making come from the Israelis.
The Israeli government governs the life of everybody from the river to the sea. The Israeli government governs and dictates the life of everybody who lives from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, whether they're in Gaza or in Jerusalem. It doesn't matter where they live. They are governed by the state of Israel. They're governed under different sets of laws, depending, again, whether they're Arab Palestinians or Israeli Jews, and if they're Palestinians, depending on where they live within Palestine. And of course, you've got the Palestinian refugees that are not even permitted to enter. They're not even permitted to go back because Israel won't allow the refugees. That's another very large group of Palestinians that have no right to even come back. So that's how they govern it. So when Israel took the West Bank, in 1967, Israel launched a massive assault against its neighbors, which of course later on they sold as some kind of a existential threat that they had to respond to, which of course is a complete lie. And they massive assault, and in 5 days, they defeated the armies of Egypt and Jordan and Syria. They took the entire Sinai Peninsula, the entire Golan Heights, and took all of the rest of Palestine, which is what they intended to do anyway. They did it in 5 days. So obviously this massive, brutal assault against its neighbor was unjustified, except to take the land. So that's what I mean when I say they took the West Bank, they took the West Bank. Now, many, many, many years later, in the 1993, 1994, we have what's known as the Oslo so-called peace accords, or the Oslo Accords, where the Israelis created this new entity, which is really a contractor for the Israelis, called the Palestinian Authority.
So we still, even though we have this Palestinian Authority, we are practically still under the Israeli
Oh, completely. The Palestinian Authority is
No different
contracted.
than pre-Oslo, no different than before, in fact.
Worse. It's much worse. Because now the Palestinians not only have the Israeli intelligence and the Israeli military and the Israeli police hunting them down, they also have the Palestinian Authority intelligence, the Palestinian Authority soldiers, and kind of paramilitary hunting them down. So my Palestinian friends, they have to worry, who are activists, not only from the Israelis, but from the Palestinians as well, from the Palestinian Authority as well.
Do you think that there was the intent actually even going into Oslo?
Oh, of course. That was the
There
intent
was-
of Oslo. You know, people talk about misunderstanding Oslo, and people say, well, you know, the Oslo process failed.
Exactly.
No, the Oslo process was a massive success. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, which is give Israel deeper control and more authority, not only on the people and the land, but also the resources, the water and other resources.
Was the Palestinian leadership at the time misled, or it was just forced upon them? Because it seems that as a negotiator, you would not agree to end up in a situation that is a net loss compared with the previous ones.
Let me tell you. Let me answer it this way, okay? In 1985, Nelson Mandela was offered to come out of jail for some kind of a compromise with the apartheid regime, and he said, "Thank you very much. I'm going back to Robben Island." When the Palestinians were presented with this, they took it, and this was the second catastrophe. Oslo was the second catastrophe, or the third catastrophe of the Palestinians. This capitulation by the Palestinian leadership to agree to this, what could only be considered a deepening enslavement of the Palestinians, and to be the entire mandate was to control their people. Their
Right.
entire mandate, they talk about these, they
Right.
talk about security cooperation.
Right.
This security cooperation does not provide security for the Palestinians. Not one Palestinian. If Israelis want to go kill a Palestinian, the so-called cooperation between the PA, Palestinian Authority, and Israel does not protect the Palestinians. It's to prevent the Palestinian resistance from bothering the Israelis.
So kind of a Vichy regime.
Yes.
Where
Exactly. Yes.
yeah,
Kind
yeah.
of a Vichy. Yes.
So thank you. Now coming back to you are a young man, and you start that journey. As you said, you had to learn or learn actually how to be able to even like walk into Palestinian.
Yeah.
Tell us then more about how that happened.
Well, I wasn't so young. Actually, in my case, it was relatively late. I was almost 40 years old when I did that, 38 or something. But it was I had to unlearn. And my good fortune was that this journey actually began in the United States, because I was already living in the U.S. when I did this. And so my first engagement with Palestinians was the Palestinians in Southern California. I was living in San Diego. And it was their generosity and their willingness to welcome me and listen and engage in kind of a dialogic kind of a thing where nobody blames, everybody just tells their story, that allowed me to go from this very, very, very difficult process of not knowing what the hell is going on, because suddenly these people are telling me that night is day and day is night. These people are telling me that night is day and day is night, telling me that there were massacres and ethnic cleansing. And what are they talking about? We were the heroes here. We don't do these things. So I had to unlearn that. And thanks to their patience and generosity, I was able to make these very difficult steps.
So, but not everyone would even seek that
No,
dialogue.
most
So
people
what
would have,
was the drive there to even
I don't know. I think
knock at the door and
it's hard to explain. Man, I saw many other Israelis and other American Jews who would come to these meetings, and leave and say, "How can you sit with them?
I mean,
They are
you
anti-Semitic.
can even
They're
say
lying."
even most of the American Jews who go to Israel, they go to join the IDF. I mean, it's just like you were
Yeah.
the
I was taking the reverse. It's hard to say exactly what it was, but I looked at the people in the room, and it's very dangerous when you build trust. It's a very dangerous process. Once you build trust, you can't undo it. And so we started building trust. You build a relationship. You look at all these different people. They're telling all these stories. I thought they can't all be lying. I can't believe they all sat one day and said, "Okay, we're going to make up the story. When Miko comes into the room, we're going to tell the story. And this is we're going to say, it was impossible." And then also Ilan Pape at the same time and some of the others published their books, the new historians, and I started reading those. And again, everything that I knew to be true turned out to be not true. I mean, and it's my family. I'm not just talking about something I learned in the history book.
Absolutely.
It's my family. My father was an officer in 1948. When I hear Palestinians who come from the villages where he was in charge, I cringe. You know, I mean, it's a terrible feeling. So that was the process, you know, reading. So I took, you know, it was early on. He hasn't written that many books at that time, but Ilan and some of the others. And then listening to Palestinians more and more, and just going, you know, you have to make a choice at one point. You know, you have to make a choice where you stand.
What was just on that? As you say, it's your family DNA is that Zionist state creation. The implication must have. You knew that the implication of going into that direction would have been devastating for you as an Israeli and your family. Tell us more. What would be the consequences of taking that you knew you would have to cut tie with the family, or you could not fit into that you were.
Yeah, I mean, you can't undo what you know. You know what I mean? You can't turn back once you've taken the path like this. You can't really turn back. There's only one way to go, and then you deal with the consequences. You know, so.
What were the consequences, for example, like?
Well, you know, so I would go to, you know, until October 7th, I would go to Palestine a lot, and I would go and I stay with my family. I used to stay with my family. They knew what I do, and you know, family. We have a whole range of opinions. Sadly, we still have a very wide, broad range of opinions, and so it was don't ask, don't tell. Once a week, there's always a family dinner. We used to do it Friday night.
It's like Thanksgiving every week.
Whatever, and then my mother was too old to do it, so my sister did it. But so all my friends knew every Friday at 6 o'clock, I go home, I sit with my family, and you leave these friends of yours behind in this horrific reality. And I can get in a car and drive back to Jerusalem and sit with my family in a beautiful house and a beautiful garden and have a nice dinner. And it makes you a little bit crazy, but you have to make that choice, or else you don't have a family anymore.
Exactly.
In my case, after October 7th, that ended. By the way, that relationship that I had with my family has been disconnected, at least for now, since October 7th. But that was the implication, that we all have to just live with disagreement, and it lasted, you know, for a pretty long time.
So now take us back to, you visited those Palestinian communities in San Diego. You educate yourself with Ilan Papp and others. What you face the consequences, and you take that decision that you're willing to pay the price. Then what happened next?
Then the next decision is the next things you face is you're at an intersection. So I was brought up very proud Zionist, and proud of Zionism, and proud of Israel, and proud of my family. So what about that? So you can't have it both ways. You either reject it if you think it's wrong, or you stay with it if you agree with it. And that's a very tough decision when it's your family, your grandparents, and this whole history that you grow up admiring and being proud of.
It's your identity.
So I had to, and then the second result of that is, what is my identity then? So I had to deal with these two things. So my decision was absolute. I mean, I rejected Zionism, and that was it. There was no other way.
So maybe just tell us why it's not compatible to be still proud of your state, identity as a Zionist, and at the same time have empathy and compassion toward the Palestinians. We know about the left, the Israeli left. Could you be a progressive Zionist? What was not?
That's a good question. So there's a myth out there that you could have a broad range of Zionism. Okay, Zionism is a racist, settler colonial, violent ideology that produced an apartheid state, a genocidal apartheid state. There are no shades of gray.
Okay.
This is it. And anybody that pretends that there are shades of gray just isn't willing to admit that there are no shades of gray. So with racism, you either reject it or you're part of it. That's it. And so I say it now, it's a very difficult decision to make. It's a very difficult realization to make. And then again, who am I? How do I fit into all this? I'm not Palestinian. If you ask me where I'm from, I am from Palestine. If I talk about the country, I call it Palestine. I will not use the other name, and I don't think anybody should, because that legitimizes this genocidal apartheid state. At the same time, culturally and every other way, obviously I'm not an Arab. I'm an Israeli. So Israeliness is a new thing, and you've got to come to terms with what is this thing that is this. And I think the easiest way to compare it would be to compare it to white South Africans.
Also,
They're Africans, they're South Africans, but they're white. They're the descendants of settlers, racists, violent settlers. Well, that's my story too.
did they also have a kind of narrative, like a Zionism, but for
Very
the West?
much. They thought they were coming to the promised land, the whole biblical thing as well. So colonizers do it. The colonizers came to this country, also believed that they were following
Right, manifest destiny.
the God, exactly. So, and that's the decision I made. So I look at the Palestinian struggle as my struggle. I don't look at it as something separate.
Because you're Palestinian in many ways. You're on the
So
part
I
of that.
believe that the struggle for a free Palestine, on all of historic Palestine, the creation of a real democracy with equal rights on all of Palestine from the river to the sea, is part of the struggle that I'm a part of, and I just need to find my role within that. But that's kind of the identity that was inevitable for me as a result of this journey.
So if I understand, is it correct to say that you somehow replaced the Zionist identity by a Palestinian, because you were born in that land, right? But Palestinian identity, maybe not culturally, but sort of your origin story in terms of where I was born. It's right. You seem to say it's Palestine. What's in that Palestine? What's the place for Israelis, or what's the place for Jews? Is that in conflict, or what would you say happened to the Israel? What do we think today as Israelis? If
Israelis are a new creation. It's like the whites in South Africa. They're not indigenous. They're not organic. They're the result of settler colonialism and violence and racism. But now they're part of the reality. There's this new nation called Israelis.
Right.
That does not mean I don't think, and most Jews never believe that going and living in Palestine is their destiny, or that they should, Palestine belongs to them or anything like that. Maybe religiously, spiritually, going to pray and seeing the land of Israel as kind of a spiritual place, which
centuries.
But not to live and to conquer. In fact, Zionism contravenes Jewish law, which is why so many ultra-Orthodox Jews reject it. So Israelis are part of the new Palestine. There's nothing you can do about that. You have 5 million Israelis or so, and you've got 7 or so million Palestinians, and that's the new Palestine. That's a reality.
Right. So they are there. It's not because you are Palestinian in that definition of Palestine that the Israelis and the Jews would have to go, or cannot be part of that equation. They can. But not with that racist, what you call Zionism. How would Israel look like without Zionism in that?
There would not be Israel without Zionism.
So it would be Jewish settlements, communities. It would be
no. It would be if it wasn't for Zionism. Look, the Zionists made a huge effort to bring Jews to Palestine.
Yeah.
It wasn't it was not an easy task. It was not an organic task. Even after World War II, after World War II, the Zionists were really hoping that there would be a big push for Jews to come. The vast majority of Holocaust survivors rejected Zionism, did not go. Only a very small fraction of the Holocaust survivors went. And many of them left because of the racism and the militant nature of the state. Many of them that did go left. And so they didn't come. The Zionists were hoping that the rich white Jews from America and Europe would come. They didn't come. They had no interest in coming. It's like a friend of mine who's a Holocaust survivor, actually, who lives in Brussels. He says, what do rich Zionist Jews do? They give money for other people to go. People who don't have a choice, they send them to go. And he was like that because he was an orphan and he was forced to go, and then he got the hell out as fast as he could. So that didn't work out. So then they thought, okay, well, let's bring the Arab Jews. Well, the Arab Jews were not Zionists. The Jews of North Africa were not Zionists. The Jews of Iraq were not Zionists. They had no interest in going. So the Zionists created an impossible reality that forced these very old and very, unique communities in the Arab world that existed there for millennia to leave. And today, many of the Jews that left and certainly the communities that they left are all sad that they left, you know.
Right, and that's interesting, right? Because the narrative that you hear about this is you had the creation of Israel, right, in 1948, and then these host countries, Iraq, Syria, they kind of then started persecuting the Jews in their indigenous Jews. But you say that's not what happened.
No, it wasn't a question of persecution. It was a question of what the Zionists did. Let me tell you another story that kind of maybe explains this better. In the year 1900, the most important rabbis of the time put out a book, a book of essays by these rabbis, warning Jews of the dangers of Zionism. This is 1900. Zionism has only been around for a very short time. And in this book, and I have the book. I was given this book by some friends, and it was written in Hebrew, which is unique. And they basically said three things. They said the idea of a Jewish state in Palestine will do three things. It will bring violence to the Holy Land. It will destroy the good relations between Jews and Muslims and Jews and Arabs. And it will cast doubt as to the loyalty of Jews in the countries where they live, because Jews live as a religious minority everywhere.
Absolutely.
They said this in the year 1900. There were hardly any Zionists at the time, but they knew that this is what's going to happen. So what happened to the Arab Jews are the second two. The relations, because of the Zionist infiltration into these communities, the good relations that existed between those communities and the countries in which they live. If you talk to Avi Shlaim, he was an Iraqi. He had no question that he was an Iraqi and an Arab Jew. Suddenly he went to this place called Israel, and you can't be an Arab Jew because Arab is dirty and bad and Jew is good. If he looks like an Arab, his parents speak Arabic, he remembers Baghdad, culturally they're Arabs, and he has to completely divorce it. He has to be embarrassed when his father speaks to him in Arabic.
Yeah. So we I guess just to take a step back, you said the historical good relationship between the indigenous Jewish communities, and you cannot even talk about hosts, like they were together, these countries. Yeah. You said the Zionist infiltration broke that relation. What happened? Like what did they do to break that centuries-old?
They sent cells. They sent the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence sent cells to create tension between these communities.
Such as?
And then the communities themselves started wondering, well, where's the loyalty of these Jews? Are they Zionists? Are they not Zionists? Where are they? Where do they stand? Are they fifth column? There were war. There was a war. The ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Arab armies came in to try to save Palestine, and so on. So where do these Jews? Where do they exist? It creates a tension.
Absolutely.
When that didn't work, the Mossad, as we know, sent. And again, Avi Shlaim in his book has names and dates of the people who did this, who put bombs in Jewish institutions in Baghdad.
Killing Jews.
Nobody was killed.
Okay.
Yeah, nobody was killed. But they put, it was a scare technique.
And they put on the back of the Arab
government. Of course. I mean, I don't think the Jews would even imagine that other Jews would do something so horrifying. They wouldn't imagine that. And similar things happen in Egypt and in other places in North Africa and Syria and so on. So I mean, it wasn't quite that extreme, but there was a sense of their loyalty was questioned naturally, because if this is the state of the Jews and this is what they're doing and you're Jewish, well, who are you? You know what I mean? So this created, and then they had, different. Not all together, but over time they all got up and left. It was not realistic for them to stay. But this was because of the Zionists' intervention in their lives and the Zionists taking of Palestine. The Zionists came in and took Palestine. They took Jerusalem. They took Hebron. I mean, you can imagine what this means. These colonizers came and look what they did. They committed horrible massacres. God only knows. I don't think anybody even knows how many Palestinians were murdered in massacres. We're talking about genocide now in Gaza. There was massacres going throughout all the last 75 years.
Absolutely. I mean, if you read Ilan Pappe about 1930s, 1940s, it's like the script of Gaza today, except that they have 1,000-ton bombs. So it's you get an idea of that.
Much more effective. Yes.
So not take us back to that realization, that choice that you make to kind of the moral choice of going into the opposite direction of your Zionist family. What happened next? What do you feel compelled to do? And
Well, activism is something that it's like, I think it's a bug or something. You can't stop it. Once you have it, you have it. So you have to act. And so then the question is, what is the most effective way to act? So I would go back to Palestine and I would protest with my Palestinian, sisters and brothers and stay with them and find out what's going on and what I can do to be, and so on. So you have to build trust and you have to build relationships and that kind of thing. And, and then the realization that I live here, so what's the most effective thing I can do here? And so I just came to an interesting realization recently. And so we're starting a place here in Washington, D.C. to fill the gap because there's nothing in Washington, D.C. that represents anything Palestinian. I mean, there's a little museum, there's a few nonprofit, a few NGOs, but there's really no place, there's no house, there's no building, there's no real representation fighting for or for the Palestinian cause, presenting Palestinian voices, advocating in a centralized kind of strategic way. So over the last couple of years, I've been working with some friends, and now we actually have a place in Washington, D.C. near Eastern Market on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Is it different to be an activist today for Palestine versus 30 years ago? Has anything changed? We talk about the tightening grip of the pro-Israel lobbying in America. How do you see that from pro-Palestinian activism? Is it harder today? There's more censorship, or it's always been there, or maybe there's less censorship?
The problem is not so much the censorship. The problem is deeper than that. The problem is much deeper than that. The problem is that Americans, not only Americans, but people in Europe as well, and in Latin America actually, and they're educated to be Zionists. The Zionists very early on, 100 years ago, began building relationship where they influence education system, where they influence the culture, where they influence literature, where they influence philanthropy, where they influence the press. They built really strong relationships.
In Israel?
No, here.
Here as well?
Here and in Europe.
Through donation, through
cultural relationships. They have, if you look around every city, every town, every state, there are all these the Zionist organizations, Zionist institutions, people who are Zionists. Being a Zionist is the most natural thing when you're an American, even if you're European. It's the most natural thing because that's part of the education.
You don't even know it's Zionism.
It's like somebody comes to you and says, we need to boycott the Jewish state because it's an apartheid state. Well, you must be anti-Semitic. Why would you say that? There's no context. Nobody ever taught Americans or Brits or French or anybody in the West that there's a whole other reality in Palestine. Nobody ever taught that. There's no context. To tell somebody today in America to boycott Israel, you must be anti-Semitic or out of your mind or something, or some extremist or a terrorist. These responses, the censorship that we're seeing, the laws that we're seeing to this, to the Palestinian activism we're seeing now is perfectly normal. It's perfectly natural because there's no education, there's no context. All people know, again, from education, from the press, from movies, from literature, from everything, and on a very local level, is Zionist.
Almost kind of to half a pun to quote another guy from Nazareth is what Jesus said: "Forgive them because they don't know what they do."
They don't know what they're doing. I don't know about forgive, but they don't know what they do. But they really don't know what they're doing. They do not know. They do not have the education. They don't have the tools to make these decisions. So when you say a single democracy with equal rights from the river to the sea, it's perfectly natural for them to think, well, if you're saying that, you're a Palestinian, you want to kill Jews. They don't understand that a single democracy from the river to the sea without the apartheid state is the only way to bring peace to that that country.
But that's interesting because I wanted to double click on that. So in that vision of Palestine that you have with that big democratic state, what do the today Israeli become? Are they still living there and calling themselves post-Israelis? What's their life looking like? Is it changing? Is it different?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Israeliness is more than, I think Israeliness is an identity now. It's like whiteness in South Africa.
Exactly.
It's an identity. And so you've got a language, and you've got a culture, and you've got this reality, and you have a history, and so on and so on. So how it will pan out, who knows? It'll pan out.
What do you respond to those who say that their very existence is at risk? They will be revenged, they will be victimized?
Well, I think it's a very interesting response when it is they who are committing a genocide and have been committing genocide for 75 years to claim that the other will do the same when there's no evidence to that whatsoever. There's no historic evidence to show that Arabs treat Jews this way at all. And if you have a democracy with equal rights where the killing of Palestinian ends, to me the most important thing right now is to bring an end
Right.
to the killing and the
First
and the
order
oppression of
priorities.
Palestinians.
Yeah.
That's the first thing we need to do. Making Israelis feel safe, well, if they don't feel safe, they can go somewhere else. I think that's secondary. Right now, Israelis have been perpetuating for almost 8 decades one of the cruelest regimes of apartheid and genocide. And what's interesting is that, this began 3 short years after the end of the genocide of the Jews in Europe.
Exactly.
So they stopped that.
Exactly.
They created this, the definition of genocide and all this, international body of international law.
Exactly.
And then they allowed it to happen 3 years later in Palestine and to go on for 75 years. So to me, that's the first priority that needs to end. How you answer all these questions of what happens next, we'll see. But I presume that I think it's safe to say that the majority of people will opt to live in peace and send their kids to school and go to work and have a life. And geographically, Israelis and Palestinians are very similar, are very close to each other. Culturally, most Israelis are actually Arabs because they come from, the families came from the Arab world. So even culturally, most of the people who live in Palestine actually are Arabs. I think it's safe to say. And yes, they will have to, they'll have to figure out how to create this new thing.
So you talk about that very systemic education system to prevent any awareness of what, as an activist, and you've done, I'm sure, a lot to tackle that. What would it take? What's the or low-hanging fruits that people in America? For me, for example, reading Elon Papp was definitely an eye-opener. No, I cannot. As you said, the education system. You're not going to introduce Elon Papp into the high school program just overnight. So, what would be the quickest way for that you see most practical that people learn? Is that you said you're building that house and
we're still trying to figure that out. That's a really good question. I think the audiences that are more the most urgent audiences exist here in Washington D.C. So these are the people that work at the Capitol, people who are part of the diplomatic corps, the press, and the public. And then, of course, the public is everywhere. So you have to create a strategy that is a unified strategy to educate all of these groups all at the same time and do it as effectively as possible. You've got to find the way to do that because, like I said earlier, to say sanctions against Israel now means you're anti-Semitic, and that's a perfectly normal response. Or understandable response. I don't know if it's normal, but it's an understandable response. So we've got to get beyond that. To talk about peace, people say, two-state solution. No. Peace cannot exist with the state of Israel existing. The peace has to be after the dismantling of the apartheid state and the creation of real democracy.
Because as such, it would be like keeping the white supremacist regime in South Africa.
Yeah, you couldn't possibly have had you can't end apartheid and allow apartheid to stay. Apartheid has to be dismantled.
So can you give us an example, a successful example of where you actually changed Americans or
Well, I speak from time to time, especially here in DC, in front of audiences that are quite conservative. And the response that I get very often is, we've never heard that before. How come we've never heard this idea of a democracy where everybody's equal before? How come we've never heard this before? Well, you've never heard it before because people aren't talking about it right now. Even people who understand it are afraid to talk about it because they worry about whatever. So it's just a question of framing it in a way that is palatable, that people understand, and also that people understand what it means. It means a peaceful resolution to the war in Palestine, to the war against the Palestinians, to the genocide that's going on.
So sort of you take the time to have a dialogue with people that do not necessarily know, and through this conversation with them, whether it's individual or group, then you see that there is a process of rethinking.
It has to be more systemic and more, I think, maybe robust than just a dialogue. It has to be methodical and well planned.
How would that look like when the entire system of communication and education is locked? How would that be? happening or to be
Look,
more.
you know what's interesting? Actually, there are a lot of teachers. I don't know there are a lot, but there are teachers out there around the country that know and understand.
Yeah.
They just need to be empowered.
Even in Israel, yeah.
They just need to be empowered to tell,
Yes,
to
that's
say
very
what
true.
they know. It's like, you know, in the American school systems, they still learn that dropping the nuclear bombs on Japan was the right thing to do, that it saved lives. They still learn this in schools today in America. The teachers know it's wrong. The students know it's
I
a
learned
lie.
that in France. I learned that it was the quickest way to end the war.
Yeah. So the teachers know it's a lie, and the students know it's a lie. I remember when my kids were in middle school, they were learning this, and they knew it was a lie instinctively. And the teachers know it's a lie historically, so they have a conversation outside of the textbook. You know, that's one way to do it. But it's you know, it's not a one-man thing. It's going to take a team to figure out how to do this, but it has to be done again on every level with all these different groups that are involved, so that we get to that point as quickly as and we don't need to convince everybody. You just need enough people to make it work to change the conversation. And I think you have to do it here in Washington D.C. This is where decisions are made.
So what would you? What can people do to contribute to that effort? People who listen to that. What can be their contribution? And maybe if you want to share where we can find you and more about your book, and if you have any departing thought.
Well, people can find me on social media. I mean, people message me on social media all the time. I'm
Which
on all
is
the different
what's
platforms,
your
Twitter or
Twitter?
what's my name, Miko Peled.
Miko Peled on Twitter.
Miko Peled.
That's the best way
Twitter
to.
or Instagram or those are the two probably most prominent one. And then we can talk about how they want to contribute and what ways they want to contribute. If it's money, if it's work, if it's volunteering, if it's ideas. You know, we're at the beginning. We're just at the entry level of this thing, and so there's a lot of room for ideas. You know, for conversations on how to do this right. So it's very easy to find me. My book is also available everywhere. The General
What's the
Son.
name?
Well, I have two books. One is The General Son, which is the memoir, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. The second book is called Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5, which is a story of, the Holy Land Foundation was the largest Muslim charity in America. And after 9/11, they were closed down, designated as a terrorist organization. And at the end of a very long legal process, 8-9 years, 5 excellent men who did nothing wrong these are Palestinian Muslim Americans, ended up in federal prison on charges of terrorism, which were absolutely disproved.
Are they still in prison now?
2 of them were just released because they
After
were the ones that
20
got
years.
15 years. One was deported. One is sitting at home and can't do anything because he's a former with terrorism charges. You can't get a job, and he's not allowed to start a business. The third one should be released this year, and the other 2 got 65 years.
It's kind of the post 9/11 version of what was the New York 5, the Central Park 5. Those guys who were, but even in some ways even more tragic.
Because these 5, also the Holy Land Foundation 5, these guys who ran that particular organization were pillars in the Arab and Muslim community. Everywhere when I travel, people tell me, "Oh yeah, I remember as a kid we used to volunteer for the Holy Land Foundation, and everybody gave because they knew they were trustworthy."
Right.
So they wanted to take down the community by taking down these people.
Right.
And they
it's actually intentional, not necessarily.
And then for the longest time, and even today you see this, you cannot have a Palestine event in a mosque.
Yeah.
Now it's changing a little bit, but for the longest time you could not mention Palestine in a mosque. People were afraid because they learned the lesson. This was a very scary lesson.
Not to compare suffering, but in a way it's a more tragic destiny than the 5 Central Park. Of course, they suffered a lot, but kind of there was this rehabilitation in some ways. But here,
we're still in the process.
It's in the process.
We're still in the process of demonizing.
Right, and those guys are still in jail. Where can we find your book?
My book is available. The best place is probably justworldbooks.com. That's the publisher's website, but it's available everywhere.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's fun.
Pleasure. Yeah, that was good.
I could have spent it until that night, so I sense that the 3 here was like, you're right, time to wrap up. But that was good.
Yeah, you're a good interviewer. Those were good
Thank
questions.
you. I'm just curious.